'Cause I got time while she's got freedom. 'Cause when
It looked like the perfect setup. A home built on discipline, rules, and high expectations. Jourdan Blue's childhood should have been a textbook example of how structure creates success. His mother, a respected police officer, and his father, a successful lawyer, enforced a world of order and stability. To outsiders, it was an ideal environment for anyone to thrive. But for Jourdan, it felt more like a prison than a safety net. The very structure that was supposed to protect him suffocated him. There was no room for mistakes, no space for vulnerability. Every move was scrutinized, every decision measured against an unspoken standard of perfection. It wasn't just about doing well, it was about doing better, always better. And in a house that demanded nothing short of excellence, Jourdan found himself rebelling just to breathe. When he told the AGT judges with a sly grin, "My mom was a cop, my dad a lawyer, so naturally, I became a rebel," the audience laughed. But it wasn't just a punchline. It was a statement of survival. Beneath that smile was the truth of a young man who had never been given the chance to carve out his own identity. His life was written for him before he could even speak his first words. His rebellion wasn't a choice, it was a reflex, a survival instinct. The more the world tried to control him, the more he fought back. He didn't hate his parents, but their version of perfection wasn't a life he could live. They had given him structure, but no space to grow, to fail, or to just be. That tension, the desire to escape, to be more than the role that had been forced upon him, would later become the fire that fueled his voice. Music became the outlet, the one place where he could exist without expectations. It was his rebellion, his freedom. But this was just the beginning. As the years passed, Jourdan's quiet resistance began to take its toll. The boy who had once stood tall under the weight of discipline started slipping into a version of himself no one recognized. Not his parents, not his teachers, not even Jourdan himself. The descent was gradual, but it was inevitable. And once it started, there was no turning back. It wasn't long before Jourdan found himself slipping further away from the structure that had once defined his life. The pressure to conform, to fit into a mold that wasn't his own, became unbearable. What started as small acts of rebellion soon spiraled into something darker. Late nights, ignored calls, and secret getaways turned into complete isolation. As he distanced himself from the expectations of home, Jourdan became someone no one recognized. Not even himself. His once stable world collapsed under the weight of rejection. The doors that had once opened so freely to him slammed shut, and pride kept him from knocking again. The comfort of his home was gone, replaced by the cold reality of nowhere left to go. With no family support, no safety net, Jourdan found himself facing the harshest truth: homelessness. Not the kind that makes for tear-jerking moments in movies, but the gritty, raw, and unforgiving kind. He would sleep in fast food bathroom stalls, hoping no one would notice him curled up in the corner. There was no refuge, no comfort. Some nights, a friend's couch provided a few hours of rest, but most nights, it was just him and the pavement, praying for a few minutes of warmth before the harshness of reality set in again. But through all of this, one thing remained: his music. It was the one thing he couldn't let go of, even when everything else fell apart. He sang, not for fame or recognition, but because it kept him grounded. Music was his escape, his distraction from the gnawing hunger in his stomach and the aching loneliness in his heart. Some nights, he sang just to fill the silence, to drown out the noise in his head. Other times, it was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. It wasn't paying the bills. It wasn't solving his problems. It looked like the perfect setup. A home built on discipline, rules, and high expectations. Jourdan Blue's childhood should have been a textbook example of how structure creates success. His mother, a respected police officer, and his father, a successful lawyer, enforced a world of order and stability. To outsiders, it was an ideal environment for anyone to thrive. But for Jourdan, it felt more like a prison than a safety net. The very structure that was supposed to protect him suffocated him. There was no room for mistakes, no space for vulnerability. Every move was scrutinized, every decision measured against an unspoken standard of perfection. It wasn't just about doing well, it was about doing better, always better. And in a house that demanded nothing short of excellence, Jourdan found himself rebelling just to breathe. When he told the AGT judges with a sly grin, "My mom was a cop, my dad a lawyer, so naturally, I became a rebel," the audience laughed. But it wasn't just a punchline. It was a statement of survival. Beneath that smile was the truth of a young man who had never been given the chance to carve out his own identity. His life was written for him before he could even speak his first words. His rebellion wasn't a choice, it was a reflex, a survival instinct. The more the world tried to control him, the more he fought back. He didn't hate his parents, but their version of perfection wasn't a life he could live. They had given him structure, but no space to grow, to fail, or to just be. That tension, the desire to escape, to be more than the role that had been forced upon him, would later become the fire that fueled his voice. Music became the outlet, the one place where he could exist without expectations. It was his rebellion, his freedom. But this was just the beginning. As the years passed, Jourdan's quiet resistance began to take its toll. The boy who had once stood tall under the weight of discipline started slipping into a version of himself no one recognized. Not his parents, not his teachers, not even Jourdan himself. The descent was gradual, but it was inevitable. And once it started, there was no turning back. It wasn't long before Jourdan found himself slipping further away from the structure that had once defined his life. The pressure to conform, to fit into a mold that wasn't his own, became unbearable. What started as small acts of rebellion soon spiraled into something darker. Late nights, ignored calls, and secret getaways turned into complete isolation. As he distanced himself from the expectations of home, Jourdan became someone no one recognized, not even himself. His once stable world collapsed under the weight of rejection. The doors that had once opened so freely to him slammed shut, and pride kept him from knocking again. The comfort of his home was gone, replaced by the cold reality of nowhere left to go. With no family support, no safety net, Jourdan found himself facing the harshest truth: homelessness. Not the kind that makes for tear-jerking moments in movies, but the gritty, raw, and unforgiving kind. He would sleep in fast food bathroom stalls, hoping no one would notice him curled up in the corner. There was no refuge, no comfort. Some nights, a friend's couch provided a few hours of rest, but most nights, it was just him and the pavement, praying for a few minutes of warmth before the harshness of reality set in again. But through all of this, one thing remained: his music. It was the one thing he couldn't let go of, even when everything else fell apart. He sang, not for fame or recognition, but because it kept him grounded. Music was his escape, his distraction from the gnawing hunger in his stomach and the aching loneliness in his heart. Some nights, he sang just to fill the silence, to drown out the noise in his head. Other times, it was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. It wasn't paying the bills. It wasn't solving his problems. But it gave him something: purpose. And when everything seemed lost, it was the one thing that kept him from giving up. His voice, fragile, wounded, but still burning, was the thread that held him together. Little did he know, this fragile lifeline would be the very thing that would lead him out of the darkness. Jourdan had no idea how far he'd come or what was waiting for him. But in his darkest moments, he sang. And that voice, no matter how cracked or broken, became his lifeline. A lifeline that would soon reach someone who would change his life forever. Just when Jourdan thought he had nothing left to give, when the weight of his struggles had nearly crushed him, a hand reached out from the past, weathered but steady. That hand belonged to Grandpa John, a quiet man with a soft voice and an old soul. Grandpa John didn't offer advice, he didn't try to fix Jourdan's life, and he didn't demand explanations. He simply opened his door, welcoming Jourdan into a space that offered something he hadn't felt in years: safety. It wasn't a mansion, nor a glamorous music studio. It wasn't a place of miracles or luxury. It was a modest, faded home filled with old memories and the hum of a record player that never seemed to stop spinning. The smell of dust mixed with a familiar crackle of vinyl records. The walls, lined with decades-old albums, gospel, blues, soul, told stories of struggle, redemption, and survival. The very kind of stories that Jourdan had never been able to hear in his own life, but here in this sanctuary of sound. In 2022, Jourdan took a step that many would have considered a dream come true. He auditioned for American Idol, the platform that could take his voice from the streets to the national stage. But as with so much in his life, his first encounter with the show wasn't the triumph he had imagined. His audition was through a Zoom call, the performance lacking the energy of a live crowd. His voice, though raw and full of emotion, didn't make the cut. His performance wasn't aired, and for many, that would have been the end of the road. But not for Jourdan. Instead of crushing him, the rejection lit a fire inside him. He didn't let the silence of the no pull him back into the shadows. Instead, it spurred him on. He realized something powerful. If producers saw something in him, something worth a second look, then maybe he was closer to his dream than he had ever thought. That no wasn't a final verdict. It was a sign that he was on the right path. If American Idol could see his potential, he had a shot. It wasn't the moment he had expected, but it was the moment he needed. He could have given up. He could have let that rejection define him. But instead, it was the fuel that kept him moving forward. Jourdan didn't crawl back into the shadows. He went louder, bolder, and more vulnerable than ever before. He didn't wait for another audition. He didn't wait for permission. He took matters into his own hands, knowing that his talent, his story, and his passion for music were more than just a shot on a TV show. They were his life's purpose. With renewed determination, Jourdan took to the streets again, this time armed with a microphone, a speaker, and an unwavering belief in himself. He wasn't performing for fame. He wasn't chasing a dream sold by reality TV. He was doing what he had done from the beginning, singing for survival. And the next time he faced an audience, it wouldn't be in a living room or a Zoom call. It would be in the heart of New Orleans on Bourbon Street, where every note mattered. But Jourdan's journey wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about breaking barriers. And as he belted out his music on the chaotic streets, he would soon realize that this gritty, raw perseverance would prepare him for the most important moment of his life. His big break was coming. But before he could take center stage, life would push him even further, right into the kind of confrontation that could either break him or make him stronger. Bourbon Street in New Orleans wasn't a place for quiet dreams or gentle performances. It was chaotic, vibrant, and unforgiving. But for Jourdan, it became the crucible where his survival instincts were sharpened, where every note sung carried not just his voice, but the weight of his world. After American Idol rejected him, Jourdan didn't retreat or wallow in defeat. He doubled down. His pride and resolve pushed him to a place where few would dare to go, and even fewer could survive. Every night, he packed up what little gear he had, a portable speaker, a microphone, and his gritty determination, and drove 90 minutes from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. He wasn't there for fame or glory. He was there for diapers. He was there for rent. He was there for his son Jax and his girlfriend, who had stood by him when the world turned its back. Bourbon Street was brutal. It was loud, overwhelming, and hostile. Yet Jourdan knew its rhythm. He knew how to sing over the noise, how to let his voice rise above the madness of the street. Every performance was a battle, a fight to make enough to eat, to survive, and to provide for the family that believed in him when the world didn't. Some nights, the police would move him along. Other nights, drunk tourists would stumble through his performance. But through it all, Jourdan kept singing. It wasn't easy. His body grew tired, his voice cracked, and the exhaustion wore him down. The nights were long, the pay meager, and the crowd indifferent. But still, Jourdan refused to give up. Every note he sang was a testament to his resilience. It was survival. He wasn't performing for applause. He was performing for life, his life, and the lives of the people who mattered most. And as brutal as it was, the grind on Bourbon Street wasn't just a means to an end. It was his education. It taught him endurance, tenacity, and the kind of humility that only the streets can provide. The more he sang, the stronger his voice became, not in technical skill, but in emotional depth. The world may not have been listening yet, but Jourdan knew he had something worth hearing. What he didn't realize at the time was that this brutal, thankless hustle would forge him into the artist he was meant to become. The lessons he learned on those crowded streets would prepare him for the moment when everything would change, the moment he would take the stage for the biggest opportunity of his life. But before that could happen, life would throw one more test his way, a tragedy that almost took everything from him. And it would change how he saw the world forever. It was January 2025, and Jourdan Blue's life was about to take another sharp turn. One that would not only shake him to his core, but would also make him question everything he thought he knew about survival. Bourbon Street, the place where he had poured his heart into every note, where he had built his resilience, suddenly became the site of a violent attack. What began as another chaotic night of music and tourists turned into a terrifying moment that changed the way Jourdan viewed the world. It wasn't just a scuffle or a drunken incident. No, this was a full-blown attack, a violent confrontation that rattled Jourdan in ways he couldn't have anticipated. While he was physically unharmed, something inside him cracked. The space he had once found solace in, where he had bled his heart into every song, was now tainted with fear. In that instant, the rhythm of the street changed for him. What had once felt like a constant, predictable beat now seemed unpredictable, dangerous, and fleeting. The place that had nurtured his survival became a symbol of just how fragile everything was. The streets he once sang on, the very ground that had supported him, felt more like quicksand than a solid foundation. When he later stood before the AGT judges, his voice trembling, he shared the weight of the experience. At the beginning of the year, there was an attack right on the exact block where I perform. His voice wasn't shaking from nerves. It was trembling from the raw memory of that night. He had looked death in the face, and it was only then that he truly understood just how fragile life was. That moment of fear, of realizing how quickly everything could be taken away, became a turning point for Jourdan. It wasn't just about chasing dreams anymore. It was about legacy. About making sure his son, Jax, didn't grow up with the same trauma that had nearly consumed him. It was about finding purpose beyond the struggle for survival, beyond the hustle to make rent or feed his family. It was about making sure that his story, all of it, every broken piece, meant something more than just surviving. And so, as the darkness of that night settled into his bones, Jourdan made a decision that would forever alter the course of his journey. He would no longer wait for permission. He would no longer hide in the shadows of his past. He was going to take one final shot at being heard, the right way, on a stage where millions would finally understand who he was, what he had survived, and why his voice mattered. But before he could make that move, life had one more twist to deliver, a moment that would finally set him on the path he was always meant to walk. And when it came, it wasn't going to be about fame. It was going to be about something deeper. Redemption, purpose, and the chance to rewrite his story in a way that no one could ever silence. By May 27, 2025, Jourdan Blue had already lived a lifetime of struggles, setbacks, and triumphs. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment when he finally stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage. As the confetti rained down and the applause echoed throughout the auditorium, the world saw Jourdan Blue as a star. It was a culmination of everything he had fought for, everything he had survived, and everything he had poured into his music. But for Jourdan, it was more than just a performance. It was the end of a long road, the final chapter of a story that had been written in struggle and sacrifice. What the audience didn't see, though, was the storm behind his eyes. They didn't see the fast food bathroom floors he had once slept on. They didn't hear the echoes of Bourbon Street still ringing in his chest. They didn't feel the weight of a near-death experience that had haunted him since January. They saw a man with a mic, standing calm and composed, ready to sing. But they didn't see the years of hardship that had built him into the man he was that day. They didn't see the fragility of his voice, the cracks that held his story together. Jourdan wasn't just singing Break Even, he was living it. The song about loss, heartbreak, and the struggle to hold it together when everything falls apart spoke not only to the audience, but to the very core of his being. With every note, Jourdan's past came rushing forward. Every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer, every scar that had been left behind by his battles. His voice cracked with emotion, but in that crack, there was power. It was raw. It was real. It was the sound of a man who had fought to be heard, who had fought to be seen. And in that, before America's Got Talent even put Jourdan Blue in front of a national audience, he had already begun building something bigger than a career. He had built a community. His story wasn't just about raw talent or a tragic past. It was about authenticity. It was about sharing his struggles, his pain, and his music in a way that resonated with people who were going through their own battles. Jourdan's online presence was growing even before AGT. Through TikTok, Instagram, and live streams, he built a platform not by singing perfect covers or producing slick music videos, but by being real. His covers, raw renditions of songs like Take Me to Church, Dancing on My Own, and Too Close, spread like wildfire, not because they were polished, but because they hit. People didn't just hear Jourdan's voice, they felt it. Every note was infused with pain, hope, and a raw humanity that connected with listeners on a visceral level. It wasn't just about the music. It was about the man behind the voice, the man who had been through hell and still found a way to rise. His followers weren't just fans, they were fellow survivors. They saw in Jourdan not a star, but a reflection of their own struggles. They followed him not because they wanted to hear his voice, but because they wanted to be heard too. They saw him as someone who wasn't afraid to share his truth. And through his authenticity, Jourdan became a lifeline to those who needed to hear that they weren't alone. By the time he walked onto the AGT stage, Jourdan had already amassed over 369,000 followers on TikTok and 46,000 on Instagram. His live streams were a safe space where people could come together, share their stories, and connect with the music. Jourdan wasn't just a singer anymore. He was a voice for the broken, the anxious, and the people who had been silenced by their own struggles. But Jourdan knew something that many of his fans didn't. He wasn't doing this for fame. He wasn't building a career just to make it big. His mission was bigger than that. It was about breaking the silence, about using his platform to talk about mental health, to push for suicide prevention, and to create a space where people could find healing through music. He wasn't just singing for himself or for his fans. He was singing for change. Jourdan began to use his platform to start conversations about mental health, opening up about his own struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts. He didn't just share vague posts about self-care. He spoke directly about the pain he had faced and how music had helped him survive. His openness struck a chord with many, and his honesty became his greatest asset. People didn't just admire Jourdan for his talent, they admired him for his courage, for his willingness to be vulnerable. Through interviews and social media posts, Jourdan shared his dream of launching a music festival focused on mental health awareness. He envisioned a space where music, soul, and storytelling could come together to heal. This wasn't about a flashy music career or the pursuit of fame. It was about giving back, about making sure that the people who had been overlooked, who had been forgotten, had a place to feel heard. And through it all, Jourdan kept his focus where it had always been, on his family. His son, Jax, was growing up with a front row seat to resilience. His girlfriend, who had stuck by him when no one else would, now stood beside him under the spotlight. And Grandpa John, the man who had saved him, watched proudly as Jourdan's voice grew louder and more powerful, echoing across the globe. But as Jourdan's platform continued to grow, so did his responsibility. The legacy he was building wasn't about the spotlight or the commercial potential. It was about something much deeper. The people he was helping, the lives he was touching, and the stigma he was breaking. Jourdan Blue wasn't just a singer chasing a dream. He was a man on a mission to use his voice for something much bigger than himself. The world may have seen Jourdan Blue's story in the sparkle of golden confetti falling on the AGT stage. But the real story started long before that dramatic moment. In the grand scheme of things, the Golden Buzzer was only a small part of the journey, a validation of his hard work, perseverance, and the undeniable rawness that made his voice so impactful. For Jourdan, the true victory wasn't in the applause or the buzzer. It was in the quiet moments that led up to that stage, and the ones that would follow afterward. As he stepped into the limelight, Jourdan knew that the journey wasn't about fame or winning a contest. It was about the people who had supported him from the beginning. his family, his followers, and most importantly, himself. This was his chance to show the world what his voice was truly capable of, not just in terms of sound, but in terms of power, healing, and connection. But Jourdan was also acutely aware of something deeper. What if the world didn't need another star? What if, instead, what the world needed was someone who reminded them that pain didn't have to be hidden? That survival didn't have to come with shame? That hope, in its most authentic form, could be found even in the broken parts of a person's story? Jourdan Blue had already lived through enough trauma to last a lifetime, but he never let it define him. Instead, he found a way to turn it into something that could give others the strength to keep going. And that's what made him unique. The golden buzzer, the confetti, the recognition. All of it was just the world catching up to a truth Jourdan had already known. His story mattered, his voice mattered, and the music he made wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever felt unheard, invisible, or broken. As of June 2025, Jourdan Blue's journey on America's Got Talent continues to unfold. But his real legacy is already taking shape. Whether or not he takes home the grand prize, it's clear that he has already secured something far more elusive and valuable: validation, purpose, a voice that no one can ignore. His net worth, estimated between $75,000 and $150,000, is modest compared to some, but it speaks volumes about the authenticity of his journey. It's not about the money or the recognition. It's about the impact he's making on a global scale. To his fans, Jourdan isn't just another singer chasing a deal. He's a man who fought through the darkest of times and still showed up with a microphone and a mission. His story isn't just about talent. It's about the courage to keep going when everything inside him screamed to stop. It's about rewriting his narrative and proving that the most powerful performances come from the most authentic places. For Jourdan, the golden buzzer wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. And now that the world is watching, Jourdan is planning what comes next. Albums that heal, festivals that matter, and a future where no one has to suffer in silence. He's building a legacy that won't be measured by fame or fortune, but by the lives he touches, the stigma he breaks, and the community he continues to create from the pieces of his own survival. The boy who once thought his story didn't matter is now teaching the world that every broken verse has value. And while the world watches to see if he wins AGT, Jourdan is already laying the groundwork for a future where everyone has a voice, a place where people can come together to heal, to sing, and to find redemption. Because for Jourdan Blue, his story doesn't end with a golden buzzer. It begins with the sound of someone finally being heard. For Jourdan Blue, the world may have just discovered him on America's Got Talent, but his journey was already years in the making. The struggles, the heartache, and the determination that brought him to that golden buzzer moment were just a fraction of the larger story. But now, with millions watching, Jourdan faces a new chapter, one that is just beginning. While the fame and the recognition feel like a dream come true, Jourdan knows that the spotlight is fleeting. What truly matters, what keeps him grounded, is the mission he has carried with him since the beginning. Jourdan didn't sing for fame, he sang to survive. He didn't share his story for applause, he shared it to heal. And now, with the world listening, he plans to use his platform for something bigger than himself. The next steps in Jourdan's journey won't be defined by record deals or tour dates. Instead, he is focused on building a legacy based on purpose and connection. He dreams of creating a music festival, a place where music and mental health awareness come together to provide therapy through art. He wants to use his voice not only to entertain, but to heal and inspire others to embrace their own stories. He envisions a space where artists and fans can unite to break the stigma around mental health, where vulnerability is seen as strength, and where every person feels heard. But Jourdan isn't just talking about change, he's living it. His ongoing focus remains on his family. His son Jax, who is growing up with a front row seat to resilience, and his girlfriend, who stood by him when life seemed impossible. Grandpa John, the quiet man who helped save Jourdan's life, continues to watch with pride as his grandson steps into the light he always believed in. Despite everything he's achieved, Jourdan never forgets where he came from. The street corners of Bourbon Street, the loneliness of his darkest days, and the love from the people who never gave up on him will always be a part of who he is. As much as his career continues to grow, Jourdan remains steadfast